Morning, I'm Tom Leonard, University Librarian, and you all know this unfolding story of new directions in the library. I'm particularly delighted to welcome Fran Blouin here today because he will be the first person to directly address the important issue of special collections and our sense of the past depending on those special collections. Fran comes from the University of Michigan, as you know, the college I went to a long time ago. Ann Arbor has a sort of special place, I think, in our sense of preserving the past. More than the Berkeley campus, it has these architectural statements where you just know that the Victorians or people early in the 20th century invested heavily in great archives and libraries. The Clements Library is the best known of those. Berkeley doesn't quite have that look. Now, the Bentley Historical Library that he leads is actually off the main campus, and it's a modern building too. So some places you have to come into the buildings to know the historical riches. That's often true at Berkeley. And Ann Arbor offers a different kind of viewscape, but he's familiar with a library that, wants people in to see the treasures. Ann Arbor, by the way, has something that Berkeley has never developed, or at least it had in my time. It has bars and pubs that have athletic memorabilia and historical artifacts. And I always thought it was great going to college there to see leather helmets and leather drinking buckets and old football players. I wish the Berkeley campus could move up to that level. But back to archives and libraries. Fran, as you know, has a distinguished background. He's both professor in the Department of History and in the I School at Michigan, as well as running the Bentley. His latest published work is The Vatican Archives, an inventory and guide to the historical documents of the Holy See. And he also, in library land, serves on the board of directors of the Council on Library and Information Resources, CLEAR. Fran, we look forward to showing you around our campus, and we look forward to the wisdom we will take away from your presentation. Welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you, Tom, and I want to express my appreciation for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure to talk about special collections anywhere, anytime, but particularly here at Berkeley that has such a distinguished history in acquiring materials and serving materials and relating those materials to scholarship. I was intrigued about your pointing out one difference between Ann Arbor and Berkeley in that there were not many pubs, because I was looking for one last night and had a hard time finding one. So, but I found dinner and I'm ready to go today. I want to do a couple of things. First of all, just as Tom said, I direct the Bentley Library, just to let you know where I'm coming from. Our institution was founded in 1935, and it has several departments. One is the Michigan Historical Collections, which is the state collection for Michigan. The Historical Society of Michigan has no collections. So the Bentley Library is sort of the equivalent of the Historical Society of California. And so we have those kinds of materials. We are also the University Archives, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. We have a separate division on reference and access. That's how we're structured. And we also have a separate division, which I'll talk about in a little bit, called academic programs. And one I forgot to put on the list because it just was newly added to our portfolio is that we run the Detroit Observatory, it's called. It's a mid-19th century observatory built by our first president, which we now consider part of the university archives. Well, today I want to do 5 things, and we'll see how far we get, and feel free to interrupt at any point in time. But given the questions that Tom sent that I should ponder about, this is sort of the plan of attack for today. I've been thinking a lot about all of these things for really three reasons. One is that I have been director of the Bentley Library now for 25 years, so it's given me a lot of time to think about special collections. Secondly, Tom mentioned we have the Clements Library at the University of Michigan, also a collection of rare materials on American history. And we're in the process now of searching for a new director. The previous director has been there for 30 years. And so we're doing a lot of thinking about that kind of collection. And then finally, I myself in my own scholarly work am interested in the whole intersection of special collections and the discipline of history. And Bill Rosenberg, a colleague of mine in the history department, and I have been working now on a book that we hope will be delivered to the press in June on this whole, what we call the Archival Divide, the different kind of areas of interest, the divergence, as I say, between libraries and scholarship. So I do want to say a little bit about that. So what I'm going to do is just throw out, some of these are short, some of these are longer. I'm going to just throw out some concepts. They might not be fully polished, and then look to see if you have any questions about it or want to pursue any of these ideas further in discussion. Well, one of the things that I've really been thinking a lot about, particularly we've been thinking about in terms of the Clements Library as well as the Bentley, is the whole matter that special collections exist in space, in physical space. And I think we've come to associate them and we value them. I haven't actually been in the Bancroft Library, and I guess I'm not going to get into the old library, but the building is very important to the identity of that library. The Clements building, a wonderful Italianate building on our campus, is associated with the Clements and with that collection, and the whole experience of doing research and going into special collections, going into these wonderful buildings, interacting with these in these spaces with these physical materials is really what special collections has been about. So it's the institution, it's the experience. And now we're facing a very interesting challenge with the possibility that all these things can be digital. If you know, the Morgan Library in New York is in the midst of doing an enormous project in digitizing its medieval manuscripts, which is going to be very exciting to be able to have those things more available. All of the materials in special collections are out of copyright. They can be digitized tomorrow, put up, circulated. There's no problem. The world is out there, the scholarly world is out there really panting to get this stuff available. No longer these kind of trips to spend 5 days at Berkeley and 4 days at Texas and 3 days in Ann Arbor and go back to Berkeley. I mean, the idea that you won't have to do that is extremely intriguing. And all of us are working to facilitate that in one way or another. We are putting our collections up. Some of them, we're enhancing access. We are moving, using digital technology to supplement the whole experience. Oops, what did I do? Of coming to the library. I think I just unplugged the projector. Is that? Did I kick the something?
An exciting event.
I know, right. And all of us in special collections know this technology is going to fail, so. Oh, there's something. Okay, so at this point, our whole foray into technology is seen as supplemental to what we do. But one of the things to ponder, and we can talk about it, but my first point really is that at some point we're going to pass what I call the threshold of adequacy, where material online will serve most scholarly needs. And then we have to face the fact that the digital will no longer be supplemental to who we are, but rather who we are as an institution and in space will be supplemental to the digital. And that is a huge, that is just a fundamental shift in the self-conception of special collections, because it diminishes the importance of space, it diminishes the importance of the experience, and it puts much more emphasis on connectivity and interconnectedness of one collection with another. So I think the whole relationship of special collections to architecture is something that's going to be quite transformed in the next 10 years, and I think we need to be prepared for it. I think most of us still think of digital activity as being supplemental to what we do. But I think the days in which it is solely supplemental is going to pass. Second point, these are my shorter points. The second point really is what is rare about rare books. And I think this too is something that is going to change quite a bit. The whole idea of having rare book repositories, I've been really thinking about this because we're trying to figure out what to do with the Clements Library, and I'm sure you're constantly thinking about what to do with the Bancroft. I mean, these are great, great institutions. And we were sitting around talking about this one day, asking, why do we have them in the first place? I mean, why are they here on campus? What purpose do they serve? And the answer that I find the most persuasive is that special collections exist on university campuses and exist within research institutions in order to move material of great research value, of value to the whole intellectual enterprise, to move that material out of private hands and into the public domain. We sit here and we work to find these things, bring them here, and make them available. So if that's the case, then it seems to me that that sets up a certain hierarchy of selection that we need to think about. Quite often, particularly I think in ages of abundance, special collections has been kind of a one-upmanship, where the Bancroft has this, so we should have that, or we should have this also. I mean, who had a Gutenberg Bible became the hallmark of what was a great special collection. But I think now, particularly because of the onslaught of digitization, what special collections do is going to have to be rethought and reconceived. And we were sitting around the other day talking about this, and one kind of interesting thought, which I'm quite persuaded by, is that we're going to have to shift our attention away from the book. That the book now, particularly within special collections, the printed book is going to be available digitally. And we're going to be able to get those materials. So all of us have, I mean, we're on our, well, you guys and us, who are our privileged campuses have a wonderful array of early printed material, early printed books, early things. I mean, we have plenty of stuff to work with students, to show them what the printed book was, show the history of printing, and we can do anything. But the future, the argument goes, and I'm persuaded by this, the future really is not in collecting more rare books. The future there is working with other special collections, putting together consortia so that we have an even more complete holding, sense of the holdings of early printed German books, early printed French books. I mean, we really can bring the whole corpus of early printing together digitally. The future in special collections, I think, is much more in manuscripts and in visuality. The manuscripts are still unique materials. What the Bancroft has in manuscripts, by definition, the Bentley does not have, the Clements does not have, the Morgan does not have. The manuscripts continue to be unique materials. We still haven't mastered mass production of the digitization of manuscript materials. I don't know if you've done any of it. at the Bancroft yet. We tippy-toed into it at the Bentley. It's hugely complicated to get a manuscript collection up online. So the future, I think, still remains in finding, purchasing, if you have purchasing power, rare manuscripts, getting them out of private hands and into the hands of scholars through our institutions. Similarly to the whole interest, not only in visual materials, but in the whole idea of visuality that's becoming such a movement, really, certainly within historical studies and literary studies. Whole visual representation, I think, should push us to think more specifically about what kinds of visual materials we want to bring in and how we want to represent the visual in our holdings. But in both these cases, we're moving away from, I think, a focus on the book. And that's really quite a sea change for rare books and special collections. So something to think about. I also want to bring back this idea of the threshold of adequacy. And I think we need to monitor that in how scholars are using our collections. As Tom mentioned, I spent a lot of time working over in the Vatican Archives and the Vatican Library. And of course, the Vatican Library has one of the great collections of manuscripts in the world, 70,000 codexes. I mean, it's enormous. And in its day, it was the center of learning. I mean, people learned through those materials. Then all of a sudden came the printed book. People were very suspicious of the printed book, thought it was kind of one of those new marginal technologies. The Duke of Urbino said he would never be caught dead with a printed book. But, you know, over time, scholars began to see that this print thing had something to offer. And as Betty Eisenstein's argued, you know, it really did sort of transform, you know, intellectual discourse, intellectual communication, scholarly communication, and it passed what I would call the threshold of adequacy. At a certain point, that new technology was adequate for most things. People still go to the Vatican Library. They're lined up to use the manuscripts. But compared to the people who are using printed books, it's, you know, a minuscule percentage. So that technology passed a certain threshold of adequacy. And I think the digital surrogates are going to do the same thing. And they're going to impact particularly our collections of rare books. People are not going to need to come and see them the way they used to. So that's what's rare about rare books. They're not so rare anymore. Third thing I wanted to talk about is the University Archives. Where is the University Archives at? Is it in the library? It is. It's in the Bancroft. Okay. I may be pushing the envelope here. And I'll be honest with you that the Bentley Library is the University Archives, and we are not part of the library system. So I report directly to the Office of the Provost. So, I may be just giving you my point of view, but I have certain concerns about university archives that are in special collections. So I'm going to talk about that. You can agree or disagree. But archives, as we know, are extremely important for universities. They are a source for intellectual history. I like to say that the University Archives is, in fact, the record of the reputation of the university. That is essentially what it is. It also is a matter of public policy that we have to keep university archives as part of our accountability, particularly you and us as public institutions. So we have a certain accountability function. Well, if rare books are undergoing shifts, university archives are about to go through a seismic change. University archives are right now endangered of, I mean, they're just in great danger. The reason is, as you all know, just by the way you do your work, because everything generated by everybody on the campus is, in essence, part of the university archives. It may not be, and sometimes we may be grateful for this, it may not be saved in perpetuity, but everything everybody does is, in essence, part of the university archives. So we start with files on personal computers. We all do our work on laptops or personal computers. Distributed computing has changed the way university records, the record of our work as employers of the university, change. We also have now, I assume you have a huge integrated administrative system at the university that drives everybody crazy, where you do purchasing and all that kind of thing. All of this stuff is also part of the university archives. We are experimenting at Michigan with what we call Deep Blue. It's a DSpace kind of thing where you kind of accumulate information about what faculty are doing, publications, working papers. You have something like that, I'm sure, here. DSpace is part of the record of the intellectual activity of the university, also part of the university archives. Then, of course, the absolutely bane of any archivist's existence is email. The University of Michigan now generates 12 million email messages a day. All of those are, technically, part of the university archives. So, archives are much different today than they were 20 years ago. Not only that, but 20 years ago, the university, our university, your university, had a huge infrastructure. And I'm sure you could give me a list, those of you who have been around a long time, of secretaries who had been in the office for 30 years in this department or that department. They had gone through three or four directors. They managed the files and kept the whole organization in order. I mean, this was part of the archival, we didn't think of it in those terms, I don't think, but this was part of the archival infrastructure of the university. Records were generated during their active use. They were managed by these people, filed appropriately, and so forth. And then, at some point, when they were about ready to be transferred into closets or basements or attics or whatever, somebody would call the university archives, then appropriately, part of special collections to bring the archives into archival custody. And that worked. But we don't have those secretaries doing that anymore. I don't know what I've got stuff on my PC, I've got stuff on my laptop, and I know some of it should be in the files, and I just don't have time to transfer it. It's just, it's chaos out there. And this is the university archives we're talking about. We also have all this overlay of legal stuff, FERPA, privacy issues, Freedom of Information Acts, I'm sure you have in California, IRB concerns, other kinds of liabilities that should be pushing our campuses, should be pushing all of our archives creators to be actually more careful about how we do our university record keeping rather than less. But it's not terribly systematic at the moment. So what we're thinking about, and it's interesting, I'm giving a presentation to all the deans of our colleges about this in 3 weeks. And this will be, and I think this is indicative of how archives have risen beyond their conception of 20 years ago. This is the first time the director of the Bentley Library has in history has spoken to the deans of the colleges of the university about a matter that the provost considers of critical importance to the organization. And what we're trying to say is that archives are part of the information flow and infrastructure of the university, and they have to be placed differently than they are placed now. Let me just double check. I still have to use paper. I'm a paper person. Ahead of myself. So, and archives need to be designed into the records, the whole records management systems that need to be developed if we are going to be able to keep an adequate record of what we do. And this means that there's a new location in the cycle of records, in the life cycle of records, for archival intervention. No longer at the end when this thing's going into the closets and so forth. The archival intervention, and we've had a number of projects already that demonstrate this, archival intervention has to be factored in at the time of the planning of the creation of the document. And that's a huge shift, and it puts the archives in a very different place in the university organization. And it's here, and this may be somewhat controversial, we can certainly discuss it, but it's here that the reporting relationship of the archives within special collections may be problematic. Because in order for the archives to engage this issue, which has to be engaged at the highest levels of the university, the archivist has to report through special collections, through an AUL, through the director of the libraries, and then on up into the thing. So, I mean, it's possible to do it, but one has to be mindful of the position of the archives in the organization when that particular function has to be represented at the very core of a very large and multifaceted university. So archives now, the whole idea of archives as special collection, I think is being extremely, well, it's going to change. And there are other issues I won't go into about faculty papers that are outside the, that may lie outside the archives information systems. What we're looking at Michigan, and we're just beginning a project that will involve myself, the head of the archives, the head of IT services, and the head of the consolidated information in MAIS, we call it, Michigan Information System, our sort of administrative information system. What we're looking at is trying to implement a system that will permit generators of documents, either through email or through Word files, or however you generate your documents, anything born digital, a way of validating, we call it, using a term from the Bibliothèque Nationale of France, validating the document, which moves it from sort of casual, on my computer use directly into a central archival file. And if the system works, and we're just beginning to think about this, but the theory is that once you decide to validate a document, it's immediately the metadata that's associated with emails and your own computer will be captured that will move this into a central, essentially a central archival file. And there's a whole afternoon to talk about all the complexities involved here, but the point is when a document is born digital, it has certain metadata embedded into it. And if a system can just capture that when it seems appropriate, it can move that into a digital archive. Now that's easier said than done, and there are lots of issues around this. But the current mantra on campus is to be extremely concerned about privacy. In fact, we've got all these posters around that drive me nuts that says, if you've read it, shred it. And I think that's anti-archival. So what we're trying to do when I talk to these deans is move the fulcrum just a little bit away from read it, shred it, to a better appreciation of the need for accountability in a university that is a public trust. And we're trying to do that through some sort of system of this kind. The elements are, certainly capturing the metadata on each of the documents created, and then related to updated directories, so that the directories, who you are is defined by the directory, where you work, and all these things sort of place the creator of the document within the broader university, and we can capture all that and move the stuff into a central file. So maybe I'll come back in 5 years with egg on my face or triumphant, but we're just embarking on this thing. Fourth thing that I am really passionate about is the importance of moving special collections away from a sense of a place that holds things. All of us, I think you immediately say the Morgan Library or the Clements Library, or for me, being an outsider, the Bancroft Library. And what's essential there is the coupling of the Clements Library, the Bancroft Library, and the coupling of the name and the library just speaks to me of the holdings, of what's there. That you've got great stuff, and you do. I mean, special collections, great special collections have great things, but I think we have to see special collections not exclusively, and I'm sure you do, but I'm pushing this in trying to push this in new ways, that they are intellectual centers on the campus. And in my view, special collections, particularly great ones like you have, special collections are I like to say they contain voices. They contain the voice of experience. They contain they allow students and scholars to come in and encounter people, encounter texts that are as intellectually important as encountering a faculty member. That the special collections on campus really need to be thought of as an intellectual strength, the way we think of a good faculty member. And to try to diminish this separation between the good people we have and the good things that we have. We have the things because they're supposed to do for the campus what the people do. So what I try to do is disassociate the exclusive focus on the Bentley Library as a library. I want people to just think of it as the Bentley, as something that's more than a library, something that goes well beyond the boundaries of what libraries do. So we have at the library, we've been working to develop what I call a visible academic program. So we're working in conjunction with the School of Information to have courses. We have a lot of exchanges that, particularly with archivists around the world, most notably now with Russia, China, and France, to bring people back and forth to talk about some of the some archival issues, most recently about this whole digital issue, but it also to connect the library with sort of circles of discourse on the campus that move beyond just those who come to consult its holdings. I also am very committed to pushing the idea of having courses that are distinctly built around the collections. And this month, I'm really pleased to report, this is very timely, that the Bentley Library and the Department of History, for the first time, are coming together to appoint a lecturer in history at the Bentley Library. And the lecturer in history, it's not a professor, it's not tenured, it's not a lot of things, but it's a step forward. The lecturer in history is going to offer undergraduate seminars in the history department based solely on the holdings of the Bentley Library. And I like it because we're going to have classes, which we have anyway. I mean, this is nothing new, but it's a designated person. And it says that the library is moving toward intellectual, a greater sense of intellectual partnership with the rest of the university. So that's it. Now the fifth thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit more complicated. I'll give it about 10 minutes. And how much time do we have? I should have asked.
Well, you've got plenty of time. You should probably start taking questions in about 20 minutes.
Okay, that's perfect. This is a particular interest of mine, but I think it's a way we need to think about how we interact with with scholarship in general. In my view, and this is my colleague and I, Bill Rosenberg, we're working on this now. So when I say it's my view, it's really our view. We've been working on this together for so long. But in our view, the history, and this is sort of an example, but I think it's a way of thinking about archives and a way of inserting archives into the broader kind of, or into a different circle of discourse on the campus. I think in recent decades, certainly, there have been lots of problems between archivists and historians, between libraries and the academic users. There's a sense that somehow or other they don't always understand us and we don't understand them. And there's been kind of a professional divide that has emerged. And I think it's largely because scholars tend to think of archives in very mid-20th century terms. And I think archivists tend to think of our users' work. I mean, we don't have time to read the plethora of journals and so forth. Tend to think of scholarship in, if anything, late 20th century terms. And I think the result of this is kind of a divergence, which is worth thinking about. Now, the argument goes that in the late 19th century, archives and historical scholarship were very closely bonded. And they were bonded because there was a convergence of interest on the history of institutions and the history of personalities. And archives, by their very nature, collect the papers of institutions and the papers of personalities. So there was this convergence, and it was reinforced by a sense of scientific history that only good history was that kind of history that could be validated by the archives. The archives was the tribunal, this one historian, I forget who, said, the tribunal of historical truth. So the archives had really the ultimate authority in how we came to understand the past. And the whole apparatus, as Anthony Grafton has shown of the footnote, only reinforced that. Well, what we're arguing is that in the process of the late 20th century, there emerged this divergence, and that there was a turn away from archival authority in history, and there was also a turn away from historical authority in archives. First is history. The focus on institutional history changed really in the mid-20th century, and there was much more of an interest in the whole issue of history from below, history from the bottom up. So in that milieu, in that academic milieu, the nature of the question shifted primarily from institutions more to broader questions of social processes, of mobility, of inclusion, and definition. And so the nature of the archives was no longer quite so clearly connected to the essence of the historical question. Moreover, there were other factors that were brought into how we understand these social processes. There was, thank you very much. Oh, okay, great. How we understand these social processes. And particularly in recent decades, in the last 20 years, the whole emergence of identity-oriented history, or the whole inclusion of experience and memory as a historical source competed with the archives and actually worked to invalidate the archives. So the authority of the archives in the late 20th century had to start to compete with the certain idea that I don't care what the archive says, my experience as X or as Y tells me that the story is different. So then the issue of language became important. You know, what do the archives really say then? So when they're saying this or that, they really are just they're betraying a certain sort of cultural bias that was part of the situation of the late 19th or early 20th century, and therefore the language then became somewhat discredited as a medium of transmitting knowledge from one generation to another. So the whole complex of how we understand the past moved well beyond the contents of our collections and the authority that we so comfortably had in our collections in arbitrating historical truth became diminished. And the idea emerged of multiple pasts, that my sense of the past could be different than your past, my country's past may be different from your country, and you had this kind of convergence of or divergence in understanding, or turn away rather, put it that way, turn away from the idea of history coming together in a kind of unified interpretation. Well, on the other side, there was a turn away from historical authorities in the archives. Most notably, I think, in the 1970s was the emergence of the problem of the bulk of material. We just had too much stuff. I mean, anybody who works in archives generated after 1930 knows there's just too much stuff. You have to decide what to keep and what not to keep. Well, the problem is that as we moved into that stage of trying to find authorities through what archivists call appraisal of material, the appraisal of content, not monetary value, David knows, you have to make judgments on something. You have to make selection on some set of authorities. But the problem was that at the time when archivists needed the guiding hand of historical authority, historical authority was becoming too diffused. Every story was valid. If you were interested in social processes, every story had potential value. So if every story has value, every document has value. And so we couldn't turn to I'm not saying historians, because we couldn't turn to history as a source of authority for archival appraisal. So archivists returned to their roots, to the essential qualities of documents, the essential nature of what institutions generated the documents and how important those institutions were. So it was collections of individual agencies were taken in because the agency was considered important, the individual was considered important, the role of the agency was considered important. The thought process among archivists in selecting materials was by and large independent of any particular historiographical framework. That's not to say it wasn't mindless about the past, but independent of any professional historiographical framework. And this was combined by the increased pressure on archives, particularly public archives, less so in universities, but I'm sure you feel it here as well, to serve a broader constituency. That we weren't here just to serve those academics who were writing books for tenure or doing dissertations, but rather we were trying to serve a broader array of people. And I don't know if it's true here at Berkeley, but a great deal of interest, which is another conversation we can talk about later, on the libraries and museums on campuses as enhancing the public role of the university, of a public university, reaching out to the public, bringing more people in. So again, that too also had to affect what we brought in. You had to bring in different kinds of material to attract a broader public. And then, of course, there are the other factor in pushing archives in a different direction was the whole challenge of digitization, not only digitization and putting together access systems, and also digitization of material. And it's not just the hardware aspect of it, but the whole thought processes that we all had to go through to rethink our catalog for online access and to rethink EAD, finding aids, and so forth, push the whole discourse among archivists away from thoughts about history and historiography to much more technical things. I annotate my slides here, so I want to see if I forgot anything. Okay, so the emergence in all of this is what we call the Archival Divide. And there are some interesting ironies that at the time when the whole injection of experience, of identity, and all these factors in coming to kind of influence how we understand the past, the infusion of all that has created a suspicion of authority, a suspicion of language, and that has spurred some very interesting historiographical work on how we understand the minority populations in Latin America, for example, or the marginalized populations in the American South, or whatever. I mean, these kinds of issues have been extremely important. But that kind of diminution of authority and suspicion of language on the academic part contrasts enormously with where special collections are now in constructing databases and enhancing access using technological means, which requires a very strict sense of authority, a very rigid sense of authority, and a very precise use of language. So we're just in two completely different worlds. Secondly, some of the most interesting work being done, particularly among historians who work in the field of anthropology to reconstruct marginalized groups, have depended on what they call reading the archives against the grain. So they go into the court papers in Latin America, for example, some of the work I know better, or they go into some of the colonial office records in the Netherlands or in Great Britain, and they're looking at all these kind of administrative papers, but they're reading it against the grain. They're not reading it to affirm these administrative processes, but embedded in these testimonies or in these court documents, they can uncover voices, and they're reading these voices in ways that we as archivists could not have anticipated. We see them as court records. I mean, that's how they're described. So it's the whole really contestation of archival authority that's going on and how people come to approach and use the archive. So they're trying to get underneath our descriptive formats. Our descriptive formats aren't helping them. They, in fact, are pushing them in the wrong direction. And it's in kind of getting underneath these formats that a lot of new discoveries are happening under our own eyes. So what we're finding is that we have very cavalierly used the idea that we in special collections, among other things, are collecting historical documents, historical collections, historical materials. And what we see there really is a need in those of us in special collections to decouple that phrase, that we deal with collections and we deal with archives, but to say that they are historical archives adds whole layers of meaning that are transient, that are difficult to understand, and that are embedded in intellectual processes and conceptual processes that are totally outside the common discourse of our profession. So we really see a decoupling of the historical and archives. So finding evidence, voice, experience, identity, process, convention, structures, and sets of all these kinds of things that historians are looking for these days really is somewhat different than some of the more structured notions of information that we are working with. I mean, we are being pushed, and maybe not all happily so, but we are being pushed in part of a larger conversation about information, because that's technology is pushing us that way. The administration of our materials, it's not to say administrators, it's to say the administration, the fact that we are administering materials is pushing us to find some sort of framework that works. But it's pushing us in a different direction than our users would like necessary to take our materials. One interesting perspective on this that I would recommend to you, it's online, is the American Council of Learned Societies report on cyber infrastructure, which talks a lot about this. And one of it's concerned about this, the concern that the whole cyber infrastructure is not sufficiently reflexive enough or appreciative of scholarly use of material. And so it advises scholars to get involved in what we do without any blueprint whatsoever. And I think that that is easier said than done. The reason is that I think it's predicated on this old mid-20th century notion that really, in the bottom line, archivists and librarians and scholars are all in this together. And if we just have some conversations, all of what I talked about will be easily bridged. But I don't think it will be easily bridged. And I think it is much better to address this issue in a much more realistic way, to say that for scholars to encounter the library is an interdisciplinary encounter. Scholars have to understand how archivists think, how librarians think, because we think differently, and we do think. I mean, we have worked on a century of methodological approaches to how we deal with information, and we are transforming those approaches into the digital environment with enormous success. JSTOR is the one I always point to. Enormous success that is having a huge impact on scholarship. But we are doing it as archivists and librarians within our common set of conceptual frameworks that we have developed and have worked, and to some degree may not work in the digital age. Historians and other scholars have other conceptual frameworks that they're working with. And as I was saying to a group the other day, if a historian is interested in economics and is doing something that would have an impact on the history of economics, that historian does not go to the economics department and say, oh, we're all in this together, and just tell me a couple of things about economics, and I'll go do my work. I mean, if you want to do something truly interdisciplinary between history and economics, you've got a lot of work to do in economics, and vice versa. Well, I think the same thing is true for meaningful scholarly work within libraries. It's not that simple to enter into our world and to make meaningful contributions. Our world at the same time would benefit enormously by being more interdisciplinary. But I believe it is a question of being open to the idea that it really is interdisciplinarity that we're working with. So, not to hit the agenda here, but if you're thinking about the future of libraries, particularly the future of special collections, what are the historians asking? Is there a historian that's going to be here who's working with subaltern people in Latin America? Or is there going to be an anthropologist who's coming to the archives for the first time to do historical research? Or someone in literary studies who's coming to the archives for the first time to work with visual material, to try to see how photographs influence experience? This is where it's at. I mean, there is enormous interest in what we have, but we are one discipline, and those are the others. So I think what the bottom line here is, I think we too often think about our relationships with scholars as a matter of interaction, one profession to another, historians and librarians, anthropologists and archivists. Whereas I think it's much more productive, particularly on university campuses, to think of it as two conceptual frameworks. It's the discipline of history, the discipline of archives, the discipline of anthropology, and the discipline of libraries. And I think to frame it that way opens up the possibilities to some very creative solutions to how we access our material. The one that intrigues me the most, just as an example we can talk about, is the idea of getting scholarly input into finding aids. I mean, if we can work with scholars to kind of program into our online access, not unlike the way people on YouTube rate the videos, I mean, there are lots of things we can do, but I think it has to be done one discipline to another, one discipline encountering another, and it has to be appreciated that way. So, by way of conclusion, I think that special collections have to be much more integrated with the academy in terms that I've just mentioned, and also that we need to build on the academic nature of collections, that the collections we hold are really part of the intellectual power of this great university. We've talked about technology and access. The other thing, and I know I'm coming to the Bancroft later, and we'll talk more about this. I think for special collections, there is a constant need for reinvention. It's very difficult, and there's all kinds of inertias built into special collections, because often they're off somewhere. They're not part of the center of library planning always. And it's very easy to just let special collections go, do today what they did yesterday. But I think it's extremely important that special collections have to think of reinvention, of reinvention in terms of how they define how they see their own materials, what constituencies on campus they want to relate to, what constituencies beyond campus. And I think these relationships are both technical, administrative, but most important, academic. So thank you very much.
Questions, and perhaps you could help them learn about us by identifying yourself.
Yes.
I'm from the Archival Design Library. You talked about the importance of visual materials, not just books and manuscripts, but can you talk a little bit about really large visual materials like architectural drawings and plans? And do you think digitization would work for that as a surrogate?
Well, you know, I think digitization. I'm sorry.
You could just briefly repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is about architectural design from the Architectural Design Library. Should we collect architectural drawings? Is there a value to that, or is it sufficient just to hold a digital surrogate? I think that's the question. We have just in a big way gone into this, so I have my own perspective. I think it's been very important to collect really good architectural material. I mean, we have Albert Kahn, was a famous Detroit architect, very important in the whole building of Detroit in its great days in the 1920s and 30s. And we had an opportunity to get his materials, all ink on linen drawings, and I mean, no digital surrogate matches an ink on linen drawing. Two things, though. One is, when we deal with architectural firms, we never agree to take everything. We only agree to take select projects. So what we do is we work with the architect and some architectural historians, and we try to the best of our ability to, in the case of the Kahn, identify the 100 most important projects that he did, and either by design or by influence or whatever. And that's what we take. There will be 2,900 projects that we won't take. Secondly, when people call and want to see these drawings, 9 out of 10 requests are for us to make a digital surrogate. That's what they want. I still think it's important we have the ink on linen, but that's what they want. That's fascinating. They don't want to bother to come in and looking over all these big, they know the projects, and that's what they want. So as I say, you know, this idea of the threshold of adequacy, we're getting there. I mean, you see it in the reading room. You see it in the emails and request for materials. Yeah, Go ahead, and I'll.
My name is Mari Miller. I'm the selected for History of the Book and Information Technology. The role of institutional repositories. There's this separate movement going on, D-Space, e-scholarship. Do you see university archives and institutional
the question is a very good one about DSpace and these institutional repositories, and do we see these going on separate tracks or integrated into the university archives? Well, first of all, my response to that, and I've given this response many times because this question comes up all the time, and it's an administrative question. Conceptually speaking, DSpace is part of the university archives. I mean, it just is. And so the question is, how do we link it? Is it the responsibility of the university archivist to oversee DSpace? If it's not part of the university archives and it remains in some other office within the university archives, does that mean it's not university archives? No, and I think there's a technological solution to that. First of all, the nice thing about DSpace is that it's not location specific, so it doesn't have to be in the university archives to be part of the university archives. But I think it's very important to keep a kind of conceptual, not let these administrative walls diminish the conceptual notion of what the university archives is. Our university archives will be stronger, greater, better because of DSpace. Because DSpace captures the kind of intellectual record, or the record of intellectual output, I mean, it's supposed to, on our campuses. So it's extremely important to the university archives. Yeah.
I have a pub recommendation for you.
Oh, thank you.
Beckett's on Shattuck Avenue. I think it has the atmosphere that you find at the event.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Bernie Hurley, Director for Library Technology. You made a point that really struck me as important about as we move forward in archives, particularly with our institutions, that we have to think about capturing these documents at the point of creation rather than later when they're hauled off somewhere, because they won't be hauled off. And the same question struck me about the manuscripts. You see more importance being placed on manuscripts because they're unique, which I understand, but how in that process do we collect these things that are born digital and may only ever be digital if we don't have those kinds of organizational ties to all the authors or creators out there?
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? The question is, I talked about university archives and the importance of intervening in university archives early on so that we can be sure to save the record of the university. And Bernie's question is, in the manuscript area, I mean, as authors and materials born digital, how do we go out and get the material and bring it into special collections? In other words, how do we collect special collections digitally? And that's a really good question. We now get this material, as I'm sure you do, and we are now putting it, at least trying to put it into some standardized format. That's our first thing, to try to get it off its the disks and so forth, and put it on a hard drive so that we can at least manage this as a single problem rather than a whole set of problems. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this. I should, but I think the same principle applies. If we can work with the donor early, and even in the paper world, frequently, I don't know about the Bancroft, but 90% of the collections that come into the Bentley Library are collections that we have sought. Very little of value just appears at the door. A lot appears at the door, but very little of value appears at the door. So we, I mean, I think it just behooves us at the point of initial contact people to work out some of these technical problems if the material is born digital. So I suppose it's part of the whole process of donor relations.
Well, just to follow up, by the time you make that contact, the fact that there might have been 16 versions of this beforehand are all lost because of the way they just kept updating the same document electronically.
Yeah, and the problem is, you can lose stuff because people are updating. I just don't have an answer for that, other than It would be an interesting topic for the Society of American Archivists, for example, or the Bibliographic Society, or Rare Book section of ALA, to try to put some information together for people who think they might be of historical importance. It would probably be a big seller. And that would be an interesting project, actually. Yeah.
Let's let Charles answer for all these nice things you said about the Bancroft.
Yeah, Charles Blouin from the Bancroft Library, and University Archives are part of Bancroft. Neither the campus nor the university has ever put any kind of serious support behind it. We do not have a funded university archivist for the University of California, for the records of the Office of the President. And so that's one thing. How do we get people, the provost and the chancellor and the president of the university, to realize that this is an important function? We've been trying for about 10 years without a whole lot of success. The second thing is the whole business about engaging the information infrastructure in this process. We have gone through at least 3 different learning management systems on campus in the past 10 years, Blackboard and so on and so forth. Most of those materials are no longer accessible. They have disappeared. The information tech, ISD information systems no longer support them, and they have just disappeared. So we see this happening increasingly in the future as systems change and there is no longer support for these obsolete formats.
I don't know if I can repeat all that. Number one is the problem of getting support from the higher administration for university archives. Charles says that the University of California does not have a university archivist. Is that fair to say? Yeah. That was one question. The other question is, what do we do about obsolete formats in record-keeping systems? We just convened at the university with some funding from the Mellon Foundation, university archivists from 26 major research universities across the country to talk about this problem. And I guess we didn't invite someone from Berkeley because there is no university archivist. We're trying to open up this as a problem for 2 reasons. Number one, several of the major universities around the table, and Berkeley would certainly be among those, are what we call institutions of consequence. In other words, what's done at Berkeley and has been done at Berkeley is something that people want to know about. So therefore, we have a responsibility at institutions of consequence to maintain an archives. The second thing is, when dealing with the administration, is to scare them. And I think we are scared. We are at the point where I think the case can be made that inadequate attention to archival documentation in this, what I call this chaos of accumulation of material, really does open the possibility of some embarrassment to the university if things that should be saved are not saved, if things are saved that shouldn't be saved, and so forth. That now we're finding that the place in most universities where the awareness of this is the most acute is at the level of the chief information officer. And I assume Berkeley has something like that. I don't know who it is. But it would behoove someone to at least start to engage this issue with that person, because it is an information issue, and flows naturally from all the information issues that have been focused on to date. And I think, like everything, universities and like everybody, you do the easy things first. So it was easy to transfer all the accounting information to an online system. all the personnel, all the purchasing. I'm sure all of this is all online, driving your assistants crazy. All of this is online. And when we started to do our major program about 10 years ago, the idea was that everything would be online. Course requirements, course validation, development, and all sorts of things. Well, finance got online, personnel got online, and space planning, I think. The easy stuff got online. But then all of a sudden, oh, course equivalents are too complicated, and development is too complicated. And well, that's where the problems are. That's where the complicated documents are. That's where the attention really needs to be the most. I mean, if I buy a box of paper clips, I mean, I can save the receipt. I mean, that's, you know, there's the same level of accountability with small problems, it seemed, ought to be applied to big problems. And I think the issue, and I am sure, because John King, our Vice Provost and CIO, has told me, and he is really spearheading this at the archives. I mean, I've talked to him about it, but he's moving on this. CIOs appreciate this problem. And it's at that level where I think you'd probably get the greatest hearing. And that's what I think.
I'm going to call the person most distant, but let me add a footnote. John King spent a time as an interim university librarian.
Yes, that's right. I know, that's right. That's right. So he gets it. That's right.
Paul.
Yes.
I'm Paul Hamburg, and I'm the Judaica librarian. It seems like basically your talk is divided into two, and that the issues of the university archives are things that have devolved into the university library simply because the library collects old things. And whereas this particular issue is something that transcends the library and needs to really be dealt with far beyond the issues of the library because of all of the complexities. So that in a sense, we're mixing apples and oranges. And with regard to the rare books, on the one hand, the development of the digital resources for these kinds of resources is involved in the democratization of access to these kinds of materials to a wider public, which is definitely something that can be welcomed. On the other hand, if you read something like Dust by Carolyn Stedman, who points out how the study of material culture and actually the getting down and dirty with actual materials can lead to important historical discoveries, the existence and the continuation and the collection of these kinds of materials is essential for the continuation of historical, well, in its broadest sense, whether you're talking about anthropological, historical, or whatever one of interdisciplinary discourse that has a hyphen historical at the end, in order to do any of that thing. And then the importance of material culture studies now is a discipline in and of itself, of which the archive, not the archive, but the rare books collection plays a significant and crucial role.
Did everyone hear that? That was very good. Yeah, Carolyn Stedman and I, we go back and forth a lot, and we don't agree with everything in Dust, but I mean, there's no question that there's a place for materiality. There's a place for seeing the actual material, and again, I go back to the Vatican Library. I mean, there's a place for those manuscripts. And nobody is arguing that those manuscripts have no valid for certain kinds of scholarly inquiry. But what I'm arguing is that experience shows that the digital surrogate is increasingly adequate. We've passed a kind of threshold of adequacy, and in fact may even enhance certain kinds of scholarship. It doesn't negate. I mean, nobody's saying throw out the rare books. Nobody's saying close the rare book, but we have to think of it differently. And we have to, I think, it behooves us at least to serve the digital user.
I just think that the argument for preserving all of that is often not made strong enough, because it's so much easier to argue on the side of the digital. And it's also because because it's not so much that, and I think it's something very important that we're able to bring more people into access with all of this material. But so long as we don't have a strong argument for the continued existence of the material culture in and of itself, we run the danger of powers that be that make decisions above and beyond us easily saying, because it's convenient, well, we'll just digitize everything and then we can throw the rest away.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that, and I don't think, collections of the scale and scope and value of yours are in danger of that sort of thing. But I do think you have to be careful not to frame the argument digital versus print, because I think we will lose that argument. I think the numbers will not be on our side. It's the enhancement, it's the interweaving of the two, where the future is possible. Even again, we go back to the Vatican Library. My good friend Leonard Boyle there told me that back in the 1920s, when there was a move to modernize the catalog of the Vatican Library, the librarians were opposed to it. They said that it was inappropriate to elevate the importance of the printed book in relation to the manuscripts. Whereas, in fact, I mean, what is the glory of that place is the integration of the printed book with the manuscripts. So I think it's the integration of the digital with the fact that places like the University of California, Berkeley, and Michigan, and Harvard, and Yale, are blessed with extraordinary original holdings will, I think, enhance our position rather than diminish it. But I wanted to get back to the other point you made, which I think is really important, and that is university archives mixing apples and oranges. I assume the apples are the great paper files that are in the archives now, and the oranges are the digital files that, if I heard you right, saying that we shouldn't be worrying about.
Well, I mean, the complex of the preservation of university archives is an issue that exists in and of itself, whether you're talking about the records from the 1860s or the 1960s or the 2060s, that all of that needs to be looked at in an integrated way. And the other issue, much more, is the issue of the preservation and the important, or the integration of rare books and digital books and that issue of material culture. There's really two very...
Well, yes. I mean, the archives question is separate. Yeah, they're two different, I think that from the point of view of the libraries, they're two different nodes of strategic thinking about the future. But in both cases, it will take some creative energy and some reinvention in order to preserve. I mean, bottom line, the library wants to preserve its role as the locus on campus for information of intellectual value. And I think both the library, I mean, there are rare books and special collections issues, and there are university archives issues in how that's done.
We have time for a couple more questions. Yes.
Well, you raised, I think, a really interesting question, which is the horizontality that digitizing rare materials, both manuscripts, whatever it is, and that linkages you can make in the digital world across collections in a sort of horizontal way, but to not forget the vertical way in which the people who work those materials as a separate discipline from historians as a unique discipline, the value of the knowledge that people coming in and talking to the people who work on historical materials or collections or regular subject libraries also have, and to somehow be able to capture both of those, both the horizontal, if you will, and the vertical ways of capturing knowledge is really important. And how the ability to still come in and not only look at the materials, but the people with the expertise in those materials shouldn't get lost in the digital universe. And how do you reconcile those two things, I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, and again, it's. Did everyone hear that? I don't know if I can repeat it, but it has spurred in me a response that, I mean, I think you're getting to the heart of the idea that first of all, library and archives work is its own discipline, but like everything on campus, we should be interdisciplinary in how we approach our work. So it's reaching out to other disciplines. Yeah.
Assuming that digitization is done in manuscript collections with various other disciplines, consulting, anthropologists, historians, you end up with a certain selection that will be online. And at a certain point, I fear that that will become a representation of the whole collection. Whereas when a person's actually in an archive using it, getting a whole container, they're going to get other things in there, and that's exactly how good scholarship is going to work. So, I mean, obviously you're not, no more than going to get rid of the books, you're going to get rid of the manuscripts. But the point being, in the whole world out there, after a certain amount of decades go by, you get this impression that everything you really need is online, and that's something that frightens people.
Did everyone hear that? That the problem of everything. I mean, I agree. I think that was really part of my first point. That we see digital work now as supplemental to our role as the physical institution holding physical holdings. But I think we have to be careful that at a certain point you reach that where the perception of who you are is totally a digital presence. And how do you connect? And I think there are digital technologies that are useful. How do you connect that online experience with the fact that you're connecting to a real place with real things? So, because I think as I said at the beginning, the architecture of the experience is part of the experience.
Extraordinarily difficult to make them work together because there's faculty and there's staff and never the twain shall meet.
Yeah, that's the bridge that has to be constructed. And we can talk more about that probably this afternoon. That's a big one.
Right, let me ask you a final, possibly a trick question. University of Michigan University librarian visited a couple years ago, Bill Gosling, and he announced with great pride that he was saving his junk mail and going to give it to the library. And this is in terms of, history from the bottom up and getting the common experience. He didn't tell me he was going to give it to the Bentley. Did he give it to you, and would you take it?
Well, within that context, I think I will decline to that matters of appraisal are confidential to the institution, and but I know the library is not interested in my junk mail, so but I.
Thank you.
Thank you.